The Energy of Abundance, Practical Advice and Spiritual Wisdom to Achieve Anything You Want in Life by Phyllis King. Chapter 9, Marriage. John Florio said, "A good husband makes a good wife." Isn't that the truth? Marriage is a great topic to explore because in addition to Western ideas of love and romance, the historical origins of marriage are so interesting. And it does say a lot about why we are where we are today in modern times. There are so many aspects and influences from different parts of the world and different times historically, and we don't tend to consider those influences or perspectives as we begin our journey into partnership and especially marriage. So often I'm talking to women and men, but mostly women who are very eager and I would say sometimes desperate to be married. And when I ask them about why they want to get married on a visceral level, on a core gut level, why is this so important to you? What does it mean to you? Their answers are really quite vague. And I've learned that they don't really know why, that it's just a programmed belief. But what comes up often is this idea that they believe they should, and that if they don't get married, it must mean something's wrong with them. So as I've counseled many clients considering marriage, I often have to remind them to focus on the building blocks of creating a good marriage rather than planning a beautiful and expensive wedding. Most often, the attention is devoted to the engagement and then getting married, yet there is no plan for what's going to happen after the I do's have been said. So let's dive into the history just a bit, because marriage in some form has been around for as long as history has been recorded. But most often it was a mechanism used for families to bond together, that the family was a significant part of the marriage. And especially when powerful families bonded together, then they amplified the collective family's power influence. And that's really what marriage was based on. And also when two powerful families came together or come together in some cases, you can change laws, influence policy in cultures. So in many cultures around the globe, regardless of socioeconomic conditions, marriage was primarily a business arrangement. Kind of takes Hollywood out of it and romantic comedies, right? However, in some cultures, marriage has been a mechanism to sanction sexual interaction or just to begin the procreation process. So we also take for granted the history of polygamy around the globe. There's been a monogamy light form of marriage, I call it, that existed in the 19th century. Men could openly step out and be with other women, and women, of course, could not. But promiscuity for men was sanctioned legally. And eventually, the Catholic Church defined monogamy as a standard. And in the United States, get this, marital rape was legal in some states until the 1970s. Women couldn't even open credit cards in their own name. So gender, power, and position have been a factor in marital arrangements and benefits for eons. And up until the 1970s, in some states, during a divorce, women would be entitled to spousal support, but would have no power over community property issues. Anyhow, if you want to read more about this, go to professorshouse.com, relationships, marriage, advice articles, arranged marriage. There's a lot more on that website. But I bring up these perspectives on marriage because they all influence our beliefs and habits around marriage consciously and unconsciously. We have not yet evolved as a culture beyond our history to be free of that programming fully. And I think that's the point I want you to think about. It's only been in the last 250 years that the notion of marriage for love has become popular, especially in the West, of course. Polygamy is still practiced in parts of the world, and according to polygamy.org, polygamy is still a legal culture in more than 150 countries, including Africa, the Middle East. It's not a country, but countries in the Middle East, most countries in third worlds. Nigeria alone is home to more than 40 million polygamists. Arranged marriages are an accepted practice in Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Japan, India, Bangladesh, and some Muslim countries. Arranged marriages still exist in China and Indonesia, and in cultures where Buddhism, Islam, and Hinduism are the prominent religions. Can you imagine? If you live in the United States, that's probably difficult to digest. So as we evolve on the planet and we want to elevate ourselves spiritually, individually, or collectively, all our relationships and how we manage them are in flux. And that is where the rub is today. Now, excluding reincarnation and the programming we bring with us in our chakras, there's a lot of confusion about what marriage is, what it is supposed to give us, and why we do it. We're still sorting that out. And it could take several generations for that to get sorted out. We're in a somewhat chaotic period, an energetic, chaotic period, as all these histories and advancements emotionally collide to try and now modernize this is dated the right word, but this long-standing tradition. Now, here's a story about Andrea's situation, which offers a typical perspective many women have when it comes to marriage. Now, Andrea came to me for several sessions to talk about her life and her relationship with her on-again, off-again boyfriend, John. As we spoke about her life circumstances, she had a lot of frustration and sadness about what she perceived to be his ability to commit. They had been in a long-distance relationship for almost 5 years. Although they talked about moving in together and moving closer together, it never happened. At one point in the session, Andrea said, "I just want the ring. I want to be engaged." I asked her why. And no matter how hard I tried to get an answer from her and how hard she tried to come up with an answer, she simply didn't have one. It was just, "I want the ring." And there was a fantasy that somehow everything would come together perfectly if she just had the ring. Granted, they never lived together. They've never spent any significant periods of time together. They really had no idea what they might be getting into. But her reply was, "It will give me security." So I tried to help Andrea see that a ring or anything cannot provide security. That's an external stimulation. It's merely a representation of an understanding two people share, but she didn't have any understanding. So she got a bit frustrated with me as I kept turning her attention in the direction of answering the question. But we pressed on. And it was clear she wanted to idealize the answer to her issues with John. It was easier than getting real with herself about the flailing relationship with him. She wanted me to simply jump on board with the idea and say, "Yes, a ring will really get it done. Congratulations." And she was glossing over the reality that they couldn't even get in the same town after 5 years of dating. She was unwilling to look at many aspects of their relationship that were frustrating and unfulfilling. And I think Andrea's scenario is similar to what a lot of people struggle with, especially when we've invested for a period of time in something or someone. But we've all been taught erroneous concepts about relationships, and we've been provided mixed messages from culture, especially now when everything is so fluid and changing, and the implications and influences from history We're taught that we should be monogamous and with one person. We're taught that marriage is the answer to loneliness, to a rich sex life, and to the man or woman of our dreams. We're taught that one person will do it all for us. Yet, that's not how marriage was originally set up. It was a family system. So now, one of the chronic conditions I see in my practice is married couples who are lonely in their marriages. One person was not intended to fill another person's every need. It was a family filling family needs together, and a marriage was one relationship in the context of a family. So now, as we struggle to create these new soulmate type relationships where one person meets all of our needs, I see non-existent sex lives. I see people who married for love, yet stay married for reasons other than love. And now, depending on which source you cite, the divorce rate is somewhere between 40 to 50%. So despite the rules of marriage, people still break them. So basically tells us there's no security in an external structure designed to regulate behavior. So we have to know why we're getting married. We have to be connected, authentic, and real with who we are, and we need that from our partner if we want and we have any chance of creating a marriage that can sustain over time. So we all know that marriage doesn't always work for sometimes it's very clear reasons of abuse and addictions and things like that. But most of us don't have any idea why our marriage doesn't work or our relationships don't work. Between the conditioning of a culture and these evolving nature of relationships in modern times and our own lack of maturity, we find ourselves focused on elements that can't possibly bring us happiness or clarify what happened. And this doesn't even begin to address the aspect of karma in individual situations. So when you put that in the greater context, we have 100 strikes against us before we even start in modern times. So back to Andrea, I agreed to disagree with her about the ring, and then I took a different approach. We moved into strategizing about what she might need to do and what she and John could do to get in the same room or potentially move in together. And that felt much better to her. So together, we created a series of steps that she felt were very reasonable and sensible. I asked her to stay in touch with me regarding the steps. And if John was not able to meet the steps, I wanted to know why and how she wanted to proceed from there. So when she left my office, she was excited about sharing this information with John so they could move their relationship forward. I didn't hear from her for a while, but about 4 months later, she reached out for a session. She indicated she and John had broken up. It simply wasn't going to work between them, and she was done. So just as she had done with the ring, she was unable to go deeply into her process to understand why it didn't work with John. I think we all would like a rescue. We all would like a quick fix or a finite answer that would solve our existential problem when it comes to love. And Andrea was no different. So in this meeting, we talked about relationships, how they're created, and the ring and its meeting. It was kind of relationships 101. So afterwards, she was a little closer to herself and her truth, but it was clear she wasn't quite ready to take the fantasy of the ring and relationship out of her mind. So in this session, she began to focus on a new love interest. She felt this new man was going to be her answer. She was convinced that John had been the problem. So now that she had found a more compatible partner, let's say, things should move along just fine. So I congratulated her on her new relationship and sent her on her way. Another few months passed and Andrea returned again. This time, she indicated, you guessed it, she and John were talking again. He tracked her down and had proposed to her. He wanted to come to the city and go ring shopping with her during the upcoming weekend. They still weren't in the same town, so she had mixed feelings about it. But the ring and the proposal didn't have the same appeal as it once did. The fantasy had been ruined for her. The cumulative effect of her long-term disappointment with John, coupled with an expanding awareness about what her needs were, left her somewhat flat about the proposal and the ring. Yet a part of her still recognized she had an opportunity to grab that thing she'd wanted for so long. So she came to me to sort it out. She was wondering now if it had been a mistake, this new man, and if she needed to go back to John. As we talked, she recognized that John was coming back into her experience, not to make her feel loved and appreciated, but to hold on to her. That he was afraid of moving on after their 5-year relationship. He didn't know who he was going to be without her. So ultimately, Andrea decided not to get the ring or to reconnect with John. And she moved forward with the new relationship. In the past 2 years since Andrea left her relationship with John, she dated several different people. But each time she began, there was a good dose of fantasy about the person and what they could give to her. And it always clouded her own judgment and sensibilities. And all of us get excited at a new relationship, but we want to take our time and not let fantasy run wild. And with Andrea, as her relationships progressed, because of this fantasy, she was often met with disappointment early on. Well, Andrea's story continues today. She is evolving, growing, and changing at the pace she can, as we all do. She's a lovely and bright woman, and I expect she will connect to love at some point. But love is so much. Love and partnership is so much about how we feel about ourselves and our confidence and our views of life, coupled with our beliefs about what a relationship is supposed to do for us. And men and women both come to relationships with sets of expectations about what the other is supposed to do for them. And in committed relationships, we do learn to negotiate. And it is implied that we're going to meet some of each other's needs, but these are negotiated over and through time as we come to recognize compatibility. And then men and women also have those deadly unspoken expectations. They don't tell the other they're expecting those things, but they are. And that can get very troublesome. For instance, he should buy me expensive presents on holidays or birthdays. He might say or think, she should have sex with me every day, twice a day. She says in her mind, he needs to take care of me financially, sexually, and emotionally. And he might be thinking, she needs to cook meals, keep the house clean, and make sure my needs are taken care of. And again, these expectations come to us through family, culture, and movies. We aren't always even aware they're operating in our decision-making and our life. We get enamored with a partner. We just think we can make it work, that we'll turn ourselves inside out, and that somehow we won't have to speak these truths. But these expectations, they create disappointment, anger, resentment, and they're all killers and suppressors of true love. And the point here is that love has to be the reason. Connection has to be the reason we decide to partner with someone. It can't be the things we think we're supposed to get from them. So as we begin to partner, our ability to identify expectations before we begin acting upon them is crucial in any relationship, let alone marriage. And in addition to expectations, I'm going to share with you now the natural rhythm that occurs in all romantic relationships. None are left out of this. The first is the honeymoon, the time of what I call the anesthetic, where everything's perfect. And the first few months of a new relationship, all we see and feel is the wonder and possibility of each other. We feel we have found our soulmate, that our prayers have been answered. And I refer to this as the time of the anesthetic. I think it's nature's way of allowing the mechanism of the relationship to be, that is to be growth, to set in. We're going to evolve ourselves through connection, and the anesthetic makes sure we get close. Now, most of us, we're human beings. We're going to encounter red flags and incompatibilities we have with another person, but we're so enamored and caught up with the idea of love and in the new feelings, we ignore. We tell ourselves the thing that came up doesn't really matter, and we don't address it, or we downplay its importance. A funny example is this old saying of two people newly in love. The woman tells a friend, "We are so in sync. We can finish each other's sentences." 2 years later, the woman says to her partner, "Will you please stop interrupting me?" So even during the honeymoon, those things that are going to be core issues between couples always show up in some form. I've seen it for decades in my clients and in my own life. That issue or issues that come up right away in the first 3 months, that's the issue you're going to be working on 10 years from now in your marriage if you don't solve it and resolve it, or get a strategy in place for how you're going to cope with it. Now, of course, as I said earlier, the honeymoon provides us a grace period in which we allow ourselves to get close to someone and reactivate our belief in love and happy endings, which leads us to the next piece of bumping up against our wounding. So let's get into the second phase of the relationship process called bumping up against the wounding. Now, somewhere between months 3 and 4 of a relationship, sometimes it's a little sooner, maybe a little later, but right around this time, generally speaking, couples bump up against each other's wounding. And when I use the word wounding, I mean core issues. Those emotional things an individual hasn't resolved, and they get triggered easily and act out or become reactive in life. And let's go back a little bit here, because the beauty of all this is that we do come together to help each other heal. And if we can use these moments to teach our partners how to interact with us, not rescue us, but how to address us in the most productive way, we really can heal and become closer around these issues. And that's really what we're trying to do. And we do it in the name of love. And relationships really are the best mechanisms for growth on the planet, or one of the best. And as a culture, we don't understand how relationships work or how to interact inside of them most often. We haven't been taught. We've only seen modeling from past generations that was grounded in roles and traditions, not necessarily centeredness and closeness. And we've received so much programming and misinformation. Most people do not know how to navigate the course of a relationship or the feelings that arise when we begin to become vulnerable and expose ourselves to another person. Ordinarily, what comes in is all these expectations about what someone's supposed to do for us or what they're supposed to be. Now, it's true, we feel drawn to people who have the potential to help us heal our own wounding. And let me say that again, that it is true. We're going to be drawn to someone who's going to elicit those exposed feelings from us. And unconsciously, we're attracted to that. We want that. But that doesn't mean we're not supposed to enjoy ourselves in the context of relationships. We're supposed to have great love and sex and do vacations and companionship. Of course we are. Relationships are supposed to include enjoyment and offer a sense of belonging and support. But underlying all that is this motivation to heal and evolve. And often when the wounding shows up, depending on how intense it is, most people translate it in the language of a specific behavior, like, would you stop leaving the toothpaste cap off? You're so messy and disorganized, or you're always late and that really pisses me off, or you spend too much time with your friends, or you drink too much. And most of these statements are really cover stories for something that's being triggered inside of each of us. And the most common culprits for trigger points are a lack of trust. We don't know how to trust. And so what it really means is I don't trust myself to know if you are real or if I am safe. Number two is low self-worth and a lack of deserving. And what this translates to is I can't open up and stay open. And the third one is unresolved childhood trauma, which really means and comes out as you keep doing this to me. Or number four, fear of intimacy, which really shows up as no one's going to hurt me or control me. And so you can see how these play out as defense mechanisms. But these first few months is really the most critical time for the majority of couples, when they are so vulnerable and so excited about possibility at the same time. So an individual's ability to understand their own triggers, their own reactivity, and learn how to use language that truly educates their partner from an I position about what's really happening is how couples can begin to heal and bond around vulnerabilities as opposed to push off from each other. Too often the finger pointing starts when the discomfort arises. But the ability to speak from a true heart-centered I position is potent, and it will bring you closer and more connected to your partner. So for instance, consider a statement like this one. You're always late, and that is so inconsiderate. So rather than, my mom was always late to pick me up from school, it made me feel afraid and unimportant. So when you're late, I become afraid you aren't coming back. I get scared. That's something a person can understand, and you don't make them wrong or a failure in the process. And so when you share a truth about why that's such an important issue to you, the other person, they don't hear I'm failing, I'm disappointing you, I'm a bad person. They hear a trauma and a difficult experience you had. And if they care about you, they're going to want to help you with that. And as a side note for the women listening to this, it's difficult for men to cope with the idea that they fail us. And so when we reframe a conversation that, in this instance, this woman was deeply wounded in childhood by her mother's behavior, and her then showing the correlation between her new partner's behavior unintentionally activating the wound, it's a completely different frame. It's a completely different presentation that her partner can hear, and he doesn't have to feel like he's failed. He's been given a tool for how he can make it better. Now her partner has valuable information, and if he truly loves her and wants to be a good partner, he will recognize that his tardiness can be painful to her, and he will begin to alter his behavior to make life more comfortable for her. And or not, which is important information, but we're going to focus on a functional relationship at the moment. But this act of revealing something like that, as opposed to calling someone out for a behavior, is an act of true vulnerability and true intimacy. So you see how this wound It serves as an opportunity for each other to get to know each other better and to become closer and bond around it. Now, of course, if the partner doesn't alter their behavior, that's the dynamic and information that we all need to know. Who's really going to show up for me and want to participate, and who isn't, and what are their limitations? But the point overall here is that we each, as an individual, we have to do our own work in how we show up. You know, we have an attraction to someone, we feel drawn to someone, and suddenly we have all these possibilities and all these feelings, and we get excited about that. And so we feel like we can throw caution to the wind, but no, we still have to remain intentional, and we still have to be present in such a way that we don't project onto our partner, and they're just not a dumping ground for all of our emotional pain and trauma. So keeping the focus on ourselves and how we can teach our partner how to treat us without making them wrong is really the goal. Now, there's a movie I've seen many times on TV because it's really entertaining. It's called He's Just Not That Into You. And it has 4 romantic story situations going on throughout the movie. And all these people are facing life questions about love and relationships. One couple, and the woman is played by Jennifer Connelly, and then Bradley Cooper plays her husband, have been married for a few years. They met in college. And in the story, some distance has come between them, and they have no sex life. And they've normalized their friend marriage. Now, Jennifer is focused on a home remodel and potentially thinking about becoming pregnant at some point. Bradley has a brief affair with Scarlett Johansson. However, that isn't ultimately what breaks up the marriage. Jennifer's character is wounded around the fact that her father was a smoker and died of lung cancer. And Bradley's character has some struggle with a cigarette addiction. And throughout the movie, he insists to Jennifer he's not smoking. And so even when he reveals his infidelity, rather than focus on that, Jennifer says, so it was you who was smoking, wasn't it? Because she accused a worker in the house. What part of my father died of lung cancer don't you get? So in the movie, Bradley hears her wounding, and she is afraid the same thing will happen to him that happened to her father, and she needs him to hear her. But Bradley does not hear her or value her enough to honor that. And so that is a scenario in which one part of the couple has expressed their true fear, and the other doesn't respond as they are needed. And Jennifer's character ends the marriage by leaving a note and a carton of cigarettes, which later on in the story, as it develops. With the awareness that we come together to help each other heal, we can choose to help one another heal by being kind and supportive friends and lovers. And this is the only path to find out if a partner is right for us. And too often we're stuck in the land of expectation. You need to do this. You're supposed to do that. And we justify that point of view. But we have to be able to show who we are, wounding and all, to see how our partner will respond to our unique set of energies and circumstances. Sometimes they will respond the way we want. Other times they will not. And as with the previous movie example, Bradley Cooper was unable to address his cigarette addiction honestly. And there were other issues, of course, but the lies began to pile up, creating distance between the couple and ultimately lack of trust or any feeling of safety. But once a relationship breaks down to that degree, no matter how much caring existed at one time, the two people won't be able to be together anymore. And again, most people are not taught how to navigate an intimate relationship. And that's what we've talked about early on in the book, that relationships have changed dramatically in the last 100 years, in the last 50 years. And so when we begin to bump up against the wounding, rather than seeing the wounds and the opportunities to heal or come closer, the interactions turn into power struggles. Why won't you spend more time with me? Why won't you visit my family with me? You're always late. You are inconsiderate. And the conversations become about topics of contention rather than focusing on the issue that's driving the discomfort. You left a glass out on the counter. I've told you 10 times I can't stand that. You're still doing it. I'm tired of you nagging me. You can't control me. All of those are push-off defense. Why do we need to defend? Why? This is someone who loves and cares about us. Because something is in us that is uncomfortable, feeling exposed, and we don't know how to talk about it. We don't know how to say it to our partner. So couples go round and round, never getting to the true source of their pain. They can end relationships never even knowing why they ended. They simply point the finger at the other as the source of their pain. And that doesn't mean that our partners may at some point unintentionally or even intentionally injure us. That's different. But in this common pattern, frustration and disappointment create a buffer between the love couples once felt and the hope they had for their life together. Interactions become about who is right and who is wrong rather than what do you need? How can I help? And couples pit themselves against one another rather than learn how to work together and come closer despite these wounds. Let's move on to the third element, the dynamic in relationships that most people are unaware of and don't consider. And it is that women are the leaders in relationships, not men. Historically, because of the financial component and because of the physical component, men have been thrust into leadership roles. Now, that is not to be mistaken for a man being manly or a woman being womanly. Rather, it has much more to do with which person has the skill set to navigate intimacy and connection more easily. And so it's not exactly about gender, but it is. Women are physiologically different than men, obviously. Our brains are wired up differently. Women tend to communicate more effectively than men, not always, but most. We have more use of language. And we're going to focus on creating solutions by talking through issues and utilizing nonverbal cues such as tone, emotion, and empathy. And men tend to be more task-oriented and less talkative. Men have a more difficult time understanding emotions that are not explicitly verbalized, while women tend to intuit emotions and emotional cues. So men process better through the left brain, and women through the right brain. And this doesn't mean women can't do math or excel in math. Men just have a larger mass area in this part of the brain. In women, the larger right side of the other part of the brain helps them solve problems more creatively, and they're more aware of feelings while communicating. And I share this only for the physical reality that is different between the genders. We all know that women's bodies create life. That causes a very different set of frequencies, considerations, and perspectives. And all these facts and information can be found at mastersofhealthcare.com if you want to read more about this. But women do not lead in relationships verbally. And it isn't that we should not discuss or have conversations, but rather we have to lead through behavior, through modeling. And when we lead with truth, compassion, sincerity, if a man loves us, he will follow our lead, duplicate it. In the previous example, when I referenced a fictional case in which the woman described her mother always being late, and how scared and insignificant that made her feel. That's an example of leading through showing what vulnerability looks like. Rather than telling her partner he failed, she demonstrates through trust and honest communication what that type of connection and bonding looks like. So it's a change of mindset that rather than to attack and demand and make ourselves right, we seek to help someone understand what our plight is. Now, there's always exceptions, of course, and that's typical. And these statements are for men and women who are honest and doing their best in life to show up and be present for a partner. And we may encounter unscrupulous types, but if you're grounded in integrity, you'll spot those people quickly. Now, marriage is similar but different to relationships and dating. When we're trying to create a marriage, we have to examine our motivations differently. While trying to create a relationship, we look into our beliefs and our creative mechanism differently, as described in the previous chapter. But once in a committed relationship like marriage, the causes that make them successful are different, because we've evolved from just being in a relationship to attempting to create a partnership that will last a lifetime. And within that context, there are so many considerations, including karma. In a marriage, we contend with religious preferences, parenting choices, division of labor, distribution and management of finances, extended family, and other goals we will make together as a partnership. Many times, couples do not consider these elements when deciding to partner. They don't consider what religion they will raise their children or why. They don't thoroughly talk through their financial considerations or their financial styles. They don't cover in-law issues or beliefs on parenting. They marry with the idea that love will conquer all and they will see eye to eye. But then as life creates itself, many times these differences are the very things that tear couples apart. In arranged marriages, often these considerations are known. The love factor is not part of the decision process. It's more about creating an alliance and situation that will be productive for the families. And then the hope is the couple will bond and come close together. Now, there are variations on the arranged marriage scenario, but in relationship to Western culture's approach toward partnering, we could use a dose of practicality when we choose to marry. There's nothing wrong with falling in love, but it doesn't erase the need to have compatibility and shared understanding about all these topics. Another factor that comes into play is the energetic level. We have and make agreements with various people before we incarnate on the planet. We have a purpose beyond our romantic objectives. For some people, being in a long-term relationship or marriage is part of their purpose. They will not fulfill the goals of their life if they are not in partnerships. Some people have multiple mate agreements in the energy in the lifetime. If one long-term marriage dissolves, another will come in quickly in order for that person to remain in a marital situation. When we have a mate agreement with someone for our lifetime, it may also include soulmate agreements, task agreements, support agreements, and various other agreements that are unique to the situation. Again, they may have nothing to do with love, other than the underlying loving nature of the soul who wants to help the other on their path to realization. Some or all of these ideas can and will play into whether or not we marry and stay married. And almost 100% of the time, from all I've seen energetically, we choose to be with people with whom we've shared experience before. That means we have karma to resolve. It can also mean we enjoy and trust each other. Historically, women have had fewer rights and options than men and very little power. There are still inequities around the globe. And marriage has been absolutely necessary for an essence to have room to create or expand in the human experience. Now, in modern times, as humanity evolves itself, women are having more and more options. So the souls that are coming to the planet now and that have been coming to the planet for the last 100 years or so have a more aggressive agenda than in previous cycles. Everything is accelerating for some purpose. My view is that the planet needs a strong feminine energy to help bring balance to the chaos that has been created on the planet. And in these modern times, we are now contending with a collective consciousness around marriage and a lot of different points of view about it that have not yet settled. We're still working it out. And we need a couple of generations where children grow up with grounded points of view about what intimacy and connection is and how it's created before the chaos that we're experiencing in modern relationship time ceases to be to the extreme that it is now. And then we're also going to be dealing with our individual karma with other people and our individual motivations to expand and fulfill purpose. And as we move forward in modern times, culture is being required to learn more about what makes relationships come together and stay together. And we're learning now that all relationships aren't meant to last a lifetime. And longevity does not necessarily equal quality and meaningfulness. The model for which marriage was based on is fluid and in some forms obsolete. Now, there's people who will still come together and stay together for the lifetime, and that's a wonderful thing. But often the purpose of those couple is united on deeper levels. They may have family agreements with task agreements or other agreements beyond love that make the relationship last. But what each soul intended to accomplish in a lifetime will also determine whether a long-term marital partner actually supports or reduces their opportunity to fulfill that purpose. And of course, we're no longer in a time, at least in Western culture, where women must rely upon men to support them financially. And women are evolving at a significant pace. They're changing the energetic contributions to the world and the collective consciousness. And a balance of feminine and masculine energies is required to heal this planet, to sustain life, and create solutions to answer impending global challenges. How we partner, why we partner, who we partner with, and how we resolve karma will all play a role in why marriages last and don't last. The day-to-day skill sets that are necessary to sustain marriages are very different than what they were 50 or 100 years ago. It's my expectation that the definition of marriage and its purpose will continue to redefine itself for several generations. We have a luxury on this planet of hundreds of religions, but only a handful dominate our awareness. But nonetheless, they can be vehicles to connect to spiritual truth. I observe that despite all these options to connect to spiritual truth, we tend to be spiritually bankrupt. And we do not have adequate spiritual awareness, and we couple that with limited emotional flexibility, we will not be successful in our relationships. Successful meaning happy, fulfilled, connected. And although a few may defy that reality through will or skill or karma, the collective truth remains constant. We won't thrive. Marriage is much more than having a relationship. It encompasses the purpose of another individual. It involves resolution of karma. It requires different commitment to life than simply being in a relationship. It is a way of life. And in this age where women have more choices available to them, they can opt not to marry, as can men. And this does not have to be a negative. Rather, it is indicative of the evolution of consciousness on the planet, and that we need all the energies of both genders to make sure we're creating a reality that supports a loving planet for everyone.